What up, everybody? Welcome to episode 5 of the PoddyC. I'm your host, Dratnos, joined by Dorki and
Yo, what
Max.
up?
Yo. This week we've been gone for a little while, although if you missed it, we had not really a PoddyC episode, but there was the Max, you and me talk to Roger, Scripe,
hmm
and Mirez, which was, I think, really good. I think that's on the same audio feeds, if Frank did his job right, so you can go check that out.
Yeah, Frank did we do have a multi-part podcast ep for people who I'm sure a lot of people listen to it by now. We felt the reason why we did that is what we could have done is had those people on like on the podcast, but it's a lot of people. So Dratnos did the sacrificial, very important job of being there and kind of leading us in some directions at certain points, and it was really quality, good conversation. And then we just decided just to upload that. We usually do those after raids. We haven't done them in a while, but I think it made for great podcast content. It was probably really easy to listen to. So yeah, that's what we did. We didn't do like a video one for that. I think it was on my channel, but it is on all audio sources. Yeah, but we are officially back, just like your image you put up, I think, on Twitter. It was
We're
like,
so back.
yeah, we're back, and then you're in hell, and then it's like, oh, we're so back. Yeah.
Yeah, that's us. We are so back. We've got a few different kind of things that we want to talk about today, but I don't know. It's been such a long time since last episode. I think one of the things we want to do is just talk about what has happened since then, right? Like what the month has been for us, which I think we're gonna try and not miss months, except for probably during races. I expect this is probably gonna be pretty normal for us though, like when there's a new race coming out, because we all just got so much stuff going on at the start of a season. So I don't know, no promises. We'll see what it ends up being like when we actually get
Well,
the next race.
so I have been
next year.
thinking about that. I think. Okay, so obviously I can't be on there, but I think you and Dorky maybe could get like I don't know, like a caster from each like camp. Obviously you're one of those, and then find some. I mean, like imagine if you guys had a podcast episode about the race right around like Tindral dying or like mid through Farak. I mean, that would have been insane content, right? So like I think it's possible. It just can't include me. But yeah, I think there's some room there. But yeah, let's all catch up where we've been. So I've been busy the last month. We did the race, which was really awesome. Didn't win that part. Really not awesome. But it was a really insane race for those of you who watched it. And then recently for me, I've been doing Mythic Plus. I think a lot of people will just be like, I'm going super hard in Mythic Plus. I'm going super hard in playing Demon Hunter. I'm having more fun playing Demon Hunter in Season 3 right now than I can't even remember the last time. I am absolutely in love with what they did with the redesign. Blizzard has absolutely nailed the redesign of specs in this expansion when they've like kind of reworked them, I guess, in every patch. And Demon Hunter is just absolutely insanely fun right now. I can't stop playing it, and because of that, the only thing you can do in this game to spam PvE is do Mythic Plus. So I am doing Mythic Plus. And for the first time ever, I'm kind of applying a lot of like Race to World first level optimization to Mythic Plus. I'm working on a lot of like really cool Weakauras and things that like kind of help at least me, and I think could help the community for doing them consistently, especially without comms. I'm going to probably be working on that a bit more after this podcast episode is there today. But yeah, I've been having an absolute blast, and I just want to play WoW all day, every day. And I think the last time that was true for me was like season 3 of Shadowlands, playing Frosty K in Encrypted, which is, I mean, comparing having as much fun now in Mythic Plus for me to even if it may be short-lived, I'm not sure, but like comparing that to Encrypted is insane, because like that was just one of the best seasonals ever. So yeah, I'm having a very good time. I'm in a really good place. But yeah, what have you guys been up to?
I've been. Oh god, Dorky, you first.
Yeah, sure. So, hey, I mean, I've been gaming with you too, Max. So it's been some good keys.
Oh yeah.
You should actually try out Vengeance as well. Like you were talking about how good Havoc has been feeling. Man, Vengeance has been extremely fun too. And I've been hearing that a lot from my chat, my stream as well. Everyone's been loving Vengeance. It feels really good, the amount of control that class brings.
Mm-hmm.
But that aside, also on top of the Weakauras talk, I like ever since you showed me that Weakauras yesterday, I was thinking to myself like, man, we could actually really add a whole lot more to our Weakauras game for M plus. In fact,
Yep.
I was actually I had this idea for Timeway, the second boss in Fall.
Yep.
I was actually working on the Weakauras to make it so that your frames would glow, or when the person has a debuff, is in the light zone and is standing still. when it's standing still and you dispel the person, the person being dispelled will take no damage. And just like being able to see that, like, oh, this person is in the clear for dispel is such a good
Oh yeah.
weak aura to have.
Yeah, I feel
But
like
yeah,
M plus
that
is kind
aside,
of,
just been reading M plus.
it's kind
Go
of
ahead,
always
Weakauras.
had this thing where you like you're expected to know stuff and like track things in your head. It kind of reminds me of like old pre-weak aura PvP as well, where it's like there's people that just take pride in like knowing that a mob is about to cast something, or like, you know, looking and seeing and getting all those things. But like there's just no reason we shouldn't use weak auras for it as well, right? Like then we can just do it at a higher key level and do it better.
Yeah, weak auras never enable you usually to do things that are otherwise not possible. It just turns things into a, you know, a more efficient flow of information. So like, for example, the thing I've been working on and I'm finalized, I just worked on it a ton today and made it a lot better with Bart, is when you're calling stops in a group right now, you usually have one person do it, which is fine. And when that one person does it, they look somewhere on their screen, they see all the stops, they have to decide in their head which is the most efficient one to use at this time, call them, let the person know who's next. And that process can be simplified so much by having a like rotational priority system that just has a big icon and is basically telling you what to call. And you can have that just remove so much thinking from that person. And there's way less of a like coggy load burden on one person. And as well as potentially having it to the point where people can use this entirely out of comms and it handles it entirely. Everyone sees whose stop is next at all times and only loading on packs where that's relevant. So it's more, yeah, like what Dorki said, like, can you do that boss without it? Yes, perfectly fine. But like making it more consistent, everything, you're doing 30 to 40 minute keys, right? So your consistency in all of it just increases the chance that you're potentially able to time the dungeon near the end if you are every single time getting through this boss easier. But yeah, just stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, like stops on the Fyrak ads are sort of like an M plus stop rotation, right? And it's like we use a weak aura for that in raid, right? Why not an M plus as well?
Wait, do you guys use a weak aura for that on Fyrak, the stops?
Yeah, one of our healers whipped up one that's like really good. It's got the prio list of like which ones we want to use in which order, and then you get a cast bar of the farthest advanced cast of any ad to tell you like you need to do it, and then there's like a line that's like, okay,
smart.
do it by most of the way through the cast. Yeah, it's like it's the best weak aura I think we have.
Yeah, that's
It's really good.
So that's something that's really interesting because we decided to just have Shaq call it because Shaq is always the person who is like perfect at that. He like hard carried his side on Razageth. So like we opted to not use an aura for that, but yeah, I could definitely see it being very good.
Yeah, it's worked out well so far for us. Although of course, you know, we've only seen that phase like 5 or 6 times. So
Well, speaking of what you guys have done in the last month, you just recently killed Tindral, right?
yeah, we're working on Fyrak now. We're like 56% or something. So hoping to secure a kill there in the next few days, maybe, which would be really cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's Tindral is I think the best boss the best placement we've had so far in a long time was, I think ever actually, it was Tindral's like world 18th.
Oh, dude,
so
you guys were owning.
Oh,
yeah,
that's awesome.
if we can hold on for Fyrak, then we're gonna put up a really good finish this tier, which I'm hoping we can do. But of course, a really hard fight.
Well, so what is your opinion of Tindral after doing it?
I really liked it. Like it's the only boss I've fought since I want to say like killed Jaden, where you just pull the boss and it feels impossible at the start, and then you like get to a new phase and it's also like, what am I supposed to do, right? How am I supposed to get through this? And then you eventually kill that version of the boss, pretty much. I mean, obviously they did nerf it a little bit before we killed it, but you know, it's pretty much the same version of the boss that we started in. So like the first 30 seconds of Mythic Tindral have like 60 mechanics or something going on in it.
Yeah, it is
And
insane.
the first time you see it, and then, you know, like the feeling of beating that fight after getting through all of that is something that I think even Razageth I didn't really have, because Razageth, it was just like there was just an ad phase that felt really hard, and then but it wasn't like hard in the kind of how on earth are we supposed to do this sort of way. It was just like, okay, this is kind of stupid and very precise.
Yeah, you could tell how to do it. It was just like, oh, it had way too much health. Oh, sorry, I meant to deal with my dogs. But yeah, the that Tindral was just all organic difficulty. You saw how to get through. It was just impossibly hard. And you did kill a version of the boss. I feel like some people will like try to imply that like doing it after the nerf was like less of a thing. The only thing the nerf did at all is just cut out like 100 P2 wipes. Like you would have like you see,
which we'd already done. We were at 9% when the nerf came in.
Oh yeah, okay. So you already got through all of that, but like you just like for people who are progressing the fight now, the only difference is you can see P3 like 4 to 5 times in an hour once you're really really good at the fight. And before it was like you were doing those 5 pulls in P3 over like 3 or 4 hours of progression because P2 was just it was like impossibly hard, right? So like it was just impossible to be consistent and kind of RNG as well. I don't know if you guys ever got those like long line of seeds on only one side of the boss. Yeah,
the little 7 ball. Yeah.
Oh, we had a 9. We had
No way.
Yeah, we had like an even spread of people, and we got a line of 9 of them on the left side of the boss. One second, I'm gonna have to let my dogs out here.
Yeah, we got pretty good at dealing with those lines actually, because we just our rule was just like always take one of the middle ones if you're there first, and then that kind of made it a little bit easier to see what was left. I don't know. It was not an easy phase. It was really fun though. Like doing the seeds was one of those mechanics where like, yeah, it just feels unfair, but then you eventually do it and it feels really good. And even the 5-second seeds, I think you still get this feeling. Like 5 seconds is still not a lot of time. It feels like a lot once you're used to 3 seconds, but it is not a lot of time.
How you guys killed Tindral really fast. And you guys have gotten the like best ranking for your guild you've ever gotten. Do you guys feel like why that's the case? Do you guys feel like you've gotten like some new players? Do you feel like you've just been better at problem solving? Or you like what is the result of that?
Well, it helps that it's a nice long tier, and so a lot of the guilds that beat us last tier have actually a lot of them have died on Tindral. Guilds like Imperative and I heard about like Honolulu Conspiracy. I think all 3 of those guilds beat us last tier and all either fell apart or like had problems on Tindral, so I think that helped, like, because our previous best tier, like Sepulcher, was really good for us, and that was also like a long, difficult tier, which I think helps because we don't like day raid, so
yeah, no.
If it's a tier that ends in the first, like if you can just brute force your way through it in the first 2 resets, then we're never gonna do well.
No, exactly, and that's why I really appreciate raids like this, because like especially I don't really notice it after the top end, but like for the Fat Shark Yeses and the Instant Dollars of the world, they have no chance of beating a team that they are probably better than, but just raid more than them on raids that are like a little bit easier. But when you get raids that even have 1 Tindral or Fyrakk, not even 2, in the past, you've seen them be able to beat them with less hours played, because it's not just like a spam pull the boss until it dies kind of thing. It's like genuinely extremely hard. So I can always appreciate a raid that truly tests you, and then the really really good guilds will especially in like the like every guild in your rank can, and probably people in chat can relate to this, where there's like the world first race, whatever, that's like its own thing, and then there's like this little competition you have with other guilds that like raid near the same amount as you, or like maybe a little bit more. Like you guys have heard of the overtime police. The only people care about overtime police is because you see yourself competing in a bracket with guilds around you that raid the same time, and you're like, hey, you're raiding too much, buddy. And then like you get to see like there's like that extra level of competition. And I think that this raids like this blow all that out of the water, because like even if those guilds put in an extra Saturday, they're not beating you if you're better than them, right?
Yeah, I think 100%. Like I don't know if we're gonna be able to do it, but our current goal is to try and beat BDG, which I don't know if we can, but we were briefly ahead of them yesterday, or 2 days ago.
I did not.
Yeah.
I have not paid attention.
Wait, what would that make you in NA? Would that make you 3rd?
Well,
that'd
fourth if you count honestly, but
yeah, you can honestly. Honestly is good.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
so,
Yeah.
I mean, they're not like NA, but they're on the E, so they're in our
True,
like
they're cheating.
thing. So
right.
Look,
They're
I'm
not
just
cheating.
saying, if we beat BDG but not honestly, I'm still gonna I'm gonna claim 3rd.
Yep. Oh, you
Okay,
got.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
the
respect
fair.
that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
But now they've accelerated a bit because they've been raiding today and yesterday since we haven't raided yet. So I don't know. It's gonna be really hard, but it's a really good guild. But we're gonna try.
All right, so we talked a bit about like how raiding has felt this season. I think the most people that I talk to are enjoying this raid. The only people I know that like didn't really like it as much are the guilds who are just on the 3-second P2 seeds for too long, and I do sympathize with that. But let's kind of go ahead, Dratnos.
I think a lot of other guilds are not gonna like it. Like I think if this boss stays unnerfed for the next like 3 weeks, I think a lot of other guilds are gonna not like it, because I think the current version of even P1 is just too hard for like a World 150 guild or something that's going to be pulling that boss imminently. So I think they should really look at nerfing it again. If not next reset, the reset after. Although it's almost Christmas, so.
Well,
yeah.
I want to ask you what you think they should nerf, because like we did a clear of it this last reset. We killed Fyrakk and Tindral this reset again, and we The thing that we thought was kind of weird, we didn't struggle with roots, but we found that it was weird that they really, really nerfed a lot of the root killers in the game, except for Warlock, and they didn't nerf the health of the roots. So with the increase in gear and without, like, with those nerfs, it kind of just felt like you were doing as much. I'm pretty sure, actually, I think THD has the stat. I think we did more damage on our Tindral kill than we did on our reclear, and that was 2 weeks beforehand. With, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of weird because we were obviously exploiting and using all of the we were exploiting all the insane classes as much as we could, and that meant that, you know, we were, you know, just destroying those roots. But yeah, how do you think they nerf it? Like, what is the part of the fight that is going to, as you go down the guild skill levels, what is the thing on the fight that isn't fair?
So my guild is one of those guilds that are on Tindral right now. We've been progging the fight. We've reached P3 multiple times. And for a guild of our caliber, I honestly don't know what you could really nerf. Because a lot of the deaths that we have are like either firebeam deaths, or someone fails the flying, or the dispels. And very rarely there's the mushroom wipes too from the tanks. And I don't know how, if you can actually like really touch on those mechanics aside from like straight up changing them. Although I guess they did change the feathers, which made them kind of weird to do. Because like, yeah, like sure, you could probably add timer to the seeds or like reduce the damage on falling star, for example. But I don't know how much those would really help guilds like mine currently.
I think health of roots is like a pretty obvious target that they should think about going for. I think they also like, so a big part of the problem of the fight is just the speed of mechanical overlaps, and if you reduce the difficulty of roots by like if you cut 30% health off the roots or something, or 20%, like that would make all of the overlaps around it much easier because you're spreading for seeds faster out of it. Or if you have somebody who doesn't get in after seeds, they can still get broken, right? So I think I would look there first. I think down the line you want to do something like make fire beams not one-shot you as well.
I was just about to say that.
That's long in the future.
Like if you can make fire beams when you mess up hit you for 80% of your health instead of overkilling you by twice your health, I think you would see a lot more consistent progression. But also the root damage thing is massive because that also nets you a lot of boss damage. Like you don't realize it, but like if those roots are dead 2 or 3 seconds earlier, that's just 3 extra globals every root set that you're hitting the boss, or it's people playing more single target builds or whatever, right? Like that's going to chop a couple percent of HP off the boss at the end of the fight. So yeah, I think those two things are probably good, but it's just a lot going on at once. The boss, I mean, we mentioned this on the previous one, but we didn't mention it on the podcast. I messaged Dratnos during the race. Like when we saw Tindral, we killed Smolderon, we went off stream, we did like a couple Tindral pulls, and I like messaged like the devs. We have like all the Race World First guilds have like a direct line of communication to the devs for bugs and things like that. And I just typed in all caps, Lamau, what is happening? Does this boss have bloodlust or something? And then that just ended up being the entire fight. So yeah, very, very crazy encounter. I do kind of want to move away from rating this. Like rating in season 3 so far has been good, but like Mythic Plus, I think has been really interesting. I think there's some things to criticize about it, but also I think the outlook on the dungeons in general is much higher than it was pre-patch. Like I remember people being pretty dobby about the dungeons coming into the season, and then I just did the race, which is like a whirlwind of things. I completely missed it. I had no idea what anyone's opinion on the dungeons were. I had no time for that. And then the race ends, and I asked my chat, the last time I heard anything was, oh, these dungeons seem super mid. And then I asked them 2 weeks after the season comes out, and they're like, oh, these dungeons rock. These are great. So like, what happened? Like, how are they great? You know what I mean?
Ooh, okay, so here's what my take on it. Here's how I see it. In terms of just pushing keys, right now the keys are still not amazing. Like I think a lot of the players who are trying to get into like the higher and higher keys are not having the best time. But 20 keys have actually been really easy this season. And like the older dungeons too, they are extremely low on the cognitive load, which a lot of people like. Like something I've noticed is that people aren't as big of a fan of the Dragonflight dungeons in the past few seasons compared to the older dungeons. Like people prefer Freehold and Crests and Halls of Valor and stuff like that. And people who are just trying to get by, you know, doing their weekly keys and all that, they've been vibing hard with these 20 keys. Like these 20 keys are so chill. I've been seeing people who normally get 20 keys done within like in a month or two that are just getting it done in the first 2 weeks. There's been people on Reddit who aren't exactly the biggest M plus pushers who are actually completing 20s now fairly easily. And I think that's a large part of why people are a fan of this set of dungeons and this season M plus in general.
Okay, so well, first of all, that's really interesting, but I had not thought about it the way you just put it, and that is, for a while, it was like Keystone Master was like this aspirational goal. Like that's what you go for to like in quotes complete Mythic Plus for a lot of people, because like a lot of people's goals in Mythic Plus is not doing 27s, right? It is getting Keystone Master, maybe getting title for the very very few at the top, but it's also the dungeon teleports, the 20s, the dungeon teleports, and the vault loot is like, I don't know, I'm just going to make up a number, like 70 to 80% of Mythic Plusers, like that is the end goal. There's nothing above that. Maybe even more. So you're saying that like maybe people's enjoyment of the season has been that those aspirational goals are just objectively easier than they've been in the past. So the average Mythic Plus player feels happier with it. I think you could argue potentially, this is early in the season, you could argue maybe that's a longevity issue. Like people don't have as fun for as long because, but then maybe if they really, really like the dungeons, you would say, okay, well that's fair then they would just keep going higher and like push themselves, and then they would actually get the chance of doing that rather than feeling like they are chasing those dungeon teleports all season, right? Like what do you think about that?
So that's where I feel like it kind of falls off a bit. I feel like once you start getting into the higher and higher keys, the problems in these keys start to come out, and they are very obvious. Like especially Tyrannical, I think Tettle's made a bunch of great videos about these dungeons this season, and some of these bosses are just extremely problematic. You look at bosses like Soulbound Goliath in Weakauras Manor. People are having to zone out to get PvP trinkets in order to beat the boss. You have bosses like Everbloom, a 6 minute long last boss, or like up to even 7 minutes in some cases. And you have that one council boss that just spam cast with
Yeah.
0 lockouts. Yeah, so you just have like all these crazy problems in these dungeons that start to really show once you start getting to higher and higher keys, which weren't a thing when people were just doing 20 keys, as like a weekly vault key. And that's like part of the point I was making, where like you start to see problems, you start to think, man, maybe these dungeons aren't as great. But for people who have been just doing it as a chore, just getting 20s out of the way, I find a lot of them to be enjoying it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when the reward cap went up from 15 to 20, I think most of us celebrated, right? Like we're like, "Oh, cool, there's the reason to go higher now." But that seems like that's counterintuitive then, or goes against the idea of people are happier when the highest level key they have to do is effectively easier. I think it is definitely a lot of it though, like is that the weekly 20s are just they're as hard as weekly 18s or 17s were last season, and so people are finding more success and are enjoying it more. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I also think it depends on what type of player you are, right? Because I would imagine a lot of people who are doing M plus are just there to get loot for a raid, right?
Right.
Like you're told, all right, I gotta just like farm out my Balefire branch, I gotta farm out my
But
double
even if you're just
times
like
from
rolling an
fall.
alt, it just feels good to like if you want to roll
Yeah,
an alt right now, it's
just
like,
bang
oh,
out your
I can
20s.
blast into 20s, right? Whereas if you were rolling an alt in season 1 or something, or season 2, and you wanted to, I mean, season 2 is less so than season 1, but season 1, right? And like those 20s you would be getting carried through those, and it would be hard if you were trying to get your friends to do a 20 on like a undergeared guy. So
Yeah.
I think that is a lot of it, is just that the it's easy rewards, right? And that draws people to the content like raiding and classic, right?
mm-hmm.
One
Yeah.
other nice thing about some of these dungeons in these 20 keys is you can pull really big. Like if you just go into fall, you can just pull all the mobs. You can even pull them all onto boss. You go into Everbloom, you just have like these fat pulls. Atal, you can just go in there and pull a bunch of
Oh, that's
mobs.
so
That's
true.
kind of cool.
Like, is there a direct linear response to if you can mass pull more, happiness go up kind of thing? Like, I think that's kind of like when you look and hear common opinions on what dungeons are sick, there's almost always one thing involved, and it is that there are very easy giant pulls in those dungeons, or like more to, they're not like hell on earth to do. Like I don't know. I think that's a consistent thing, and it seems like I think like every dungeon this patch. I'm trying to think of one where you can't. I guess it's kind
It'd
of
probably
like
be like
Rise.
fall or rise. I mean,
Rise,
yeah.
yeah, like Rise. It's just because the Rise has that like second room with all the sand, and like you're just fighting like one mob that matters at a time, and that feels so slow and bad. But I mean the beginning's kind of like that, but the mobs are just super dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, that room is wild. I don't know how that room is still like that. It's so like rough.
I mean, it's not even rough. It's just bad. I think it's a bad room. I think it's okay to say that. It's a pretty like you spend like 3 or 4 minutes of your key single targeting one mob that matters and like moving along sand. The whole like little line mechanic isn't something you really interact with, and I think that was intended to be like a major part of that. Like I don't know. I think they kind of missed on that room. But where do you guys think? So they did some. I missed this. They did some early nerfs or tuning, I guess, to the dungeons. I think this happened during the race. But since the race has ended, I don't think there's been any tuning. And it kind of, I mean, after I've done a lot of tyrannical keys this week, I can point out a few bosses that could probably use a little look, where
Yeah.
where like the timer is not the issue at all. It's like whether this boss is even possible kind of thing on around the 28 level, and that is probably like that'll change a little with gear, but not a lot. Like it's kind of fundamentally insane. So I don't know. I'm assuming everyone here would want to see those pretty soon.
Right. I mean, that's been a massive issue with getting into the higher keys, as I was mentioning earlier. Because the lower keys are easy, it just means naturally you have people who are going higher and higher keys. It's because the timer is extremely forgiving. We're running into this issue where you can two chest a 27 Weakauras, but you can't possibly do a 28 without like having the hardest fight in the world, fighting Soulbound Goliath. And it just becomes a massive survivability check over actually trying to time the keys, and people are just running into one-shot walls on almost every single dungeon.
I mean, that's what happens if the dungeons are mechanically pretty easy, right? Like, how do you? What else is gonna stop you from pushing a key up, right? Is at some point like either the timer gets really tight and you have one of those classic dungeons where it's like, okay, we just can't wipe it all, and it's like a 30-minute timer and it's really tight. But if it's not one of those, then it is gonna be two chest deplete. Like that's it reminds me of like Underrot last season was kind of like that too, right? Although Underrot got kind of tight. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, but that's why I personally prefer when you're fighting against the timer. That way you're like trying to figure out how you can optimize and how you can pull bigger and how you can make the pulls that are easy into more dangerous pulls. And a lot of that is what I've found to be fun in M+, but I don't really get that from doing higher keys at the moment. At the moment, higher keys is more about like, all right, how do we get through this
Possibly
specific
live this
boss, or,
fight.
yeah, this specific hard part of the dungeon.
Yeah, and there's not as much nuance in enjoying that. Like when you're like, for example, you could say that like, oh, why would you complain about like, oh, we have to progress through this really hard boss? Because it's not like a really hard raid boss where you're like doing a bunch of things and slowly learning over time. It's like that. You're doing a boss that's very easy to understand, and one ability is usually just bullshit. It's just that. It's like, you eventually reach the point of the key where every 20 or 30 seconds, it's going to do enough damage to everyone. The tree boss in Darkheart Thicket, the third boss in Blackrock Hold, Soul Rend on Yasma, not even including Racking Pain, like where you actually need a 20 to 30% personal to just not die to every single raid damage event and things like that. And those are things that are honestly like not extremely fun problems to solve. That's fine every now and then, but every boss just turning into like, make sure you have classes that can just live something that does 1.5 million damage every 30 seconds. Like that's insane, so like I think where they should experiment with capping certain abilities scaling at a certain level, because the reality is there's still difficulty past that. There still is timing the key in at all, and it becomes a damage optimization problem, and not, which is a fun problem to solve, pulling bigger to make up for that time and using better classes, like actually messing around with not playing Aug. It's absolutely a damage increase, even though it's harder. And then those are fun. What is not fun is, or in my opinion, or less fun is, oh, let's just make sure we swap our flask before this to the 6% DR over 50% health thing, or else it's impossible to live kind of thing. Like that, you can only do that so much before it's super boring. And it also makes Tyrannical significantly, in my opinion, I think the gap has almost never been bigger as far as fun between Fortified and Tyrannical right now.
Yeah, for pushing. Like for 20s, I think Tyrannical 20s are maybe slightly more fun for me right now, but only at 20. Once you start, Like if we're doing a weekly key and somebody's like, oh, I got a 25, I would say yes to that if it's fortified, and I'd say drop it to a 20 if it's tyrannical, because that's just not what I want to spend time doing.
Bosses spending way too long too. That's another problem that they haven't solved. You know how in Halls of Fusion last boss, where if you ever got an extra phase, you spent an entire extra minute or two on the boss. Well, there's a whole lot of that this season.
Oh yeah, shields.
Everbloom last
Yeah.
boss, yeah. First boss of Rise, we were doing that last night.
Yeah,
that boss was
dude,
living
we
forever.
did the first boss last night on Rise on a 28 Tyrannical
Oh,
Rise.
no.
I think we were fighting that boss for like 7 minutes or something. That was
that was bad.
that
It
was
just kept
insane.
shielding.
Yeah, they do need to fix that, because like that's the fundamental issue. This is a whole other podcast episode with, I'm sure, a great guest, but the Fortified versus Tyrannical thing is, I think, more interesting than it's ever been. And I also think that anytime a boss in dungeons, which again are not designed to be insanely intricate, right? Anytime you're doing them for longer than 4 minutes, there's just this unified feeling of like, what are we doing here? Like what's going on right now? This as
Yeah,
far
I would
no
rather
one wants
do
to be
a
doing
raid
that.
boss in that case.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
why
Yeah.
not raiding instead?
But raid bosses give you enough things in that time to be interested, hopefully.
They have a P2, right?
Yeah.
And a P3. Like, there's no boss where you're just
Yeah.
fighting P1 for 7 minutes and it feels good. That's literally Council of Dreams. There's a reason that boss sucks.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what do you guys think about them fixing all the cheeses this season? It's actually crazy. They haven't done this before. It's never been a case where they're like fixing all these snap spots, fixing all these reverse snaps, fixing all these line of sight spots. I've never seen them crack down so hard on these quote unquote M plus tech. How do you guys feel about
I
it?
missed all of it. I have no opinion. I think all of this happened before I started doing it.
I think I'm down for this. Like, I always think it's good to use anything you can come up with, and but like I do feel like the part of the difficulty of getting into M plus in the past was like learning all of this cheese that was so powerful. Like something like shifting into cat form for every soul thorns on soulbound Goliath is just something where like if you have a new druid or something coming with you, then they're not going to know that. And like knowing snap spots and stuff like that is the type of difficulty that's not intuitive, right? You don't learn that by just being good at WoW and then thinking about how you're supposed to solve something. You learn that by like knowing that you're supposed to do snap spots.
Watching
and,
Oteto's video.
Yeah, watching a video about where the spot is in a dungeon, or like there are people who test it and spend like 4 hours in a dungeon trying every snap spot, which is cool and fun to do once or something. But I think it's fine that they look at those sorts of things and they're like, okay, this is really powerful. We're gonna remove it because we don't want the balance. We don't want high keys to be about doing those things, right? We want high keys to be about doing well, actually, I don't know what they want the high keys to be about, but I guess it's not that. So, I think I agree with it not being that. I think also like, could you imagine if Soulbound Goliath was just the right way to do that dungeon was to play like 3 DPS druids or something, so you could just shift all of the, thorns, something like that. That would be, I think that would be bad too. So I think that most of the cheeses they've been fixing have been good.
I mean, they're
Yeah,
gonna.
I would agree with you for the most part, but oh man, some of these solutions are like there's just no solution to it
the
otherwise.
problem is that sometimes they take a mechanic that was not a problem because you knew about the cheese, and there I can understand where they'd look at it and they'd be like, oh, new players are doing this dungeon and they are doing it without the cheese and it sucks for them. But then they just remove the cheese and now everybody has to do it and it sucks for everybody, and it's like, this is not good.
The whole PvP trinket to do Soulbound Goliath is actually kind of an interesting problem to solve initially. Like problem solving something that seems impossible and figuring it out is fun for a very brief amount of time usually. Like someone is doing that and they're trying it with an AUG and they're like, dude, this boss is impossible. And someone's like, wait, we should try PvP trinkets. You do it again, you drop the key, you go PvP trinket, and you're like, oh, this makes it so much better. Wow, we can actually do this dungeon now. For the next like hour or two of Weakauras, that's super fun. And then it's immediately like, why are we zoning out and putting on PvP trinkets? That's insane, right? So like they're fun to solve initially, but I think you hit on a really good point. And this is definitely a high key versus like mid-level, lower key thing. But if you're going to make increasingly more complex dungeons, which I think is inarguable, they have done that. Like the dungeons just have a bit more going on. That has to come with a level of intuitiveness. Like it has to be intuitive for the newer player to like just kind of know what's going on. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's not hard. If you have to cheese things, it's usually not because of difficulty. You can make something that's very easy to understand very, very, very hard. Right? It's not that. like I think solving the cheese is fun initially, but like leaving cheese in the game, first of all, if you think about it from their perspective, why they fix it. When a developer came up with that mechanic in the first place, they had an idea of how it would be solved, and that is why they made the mechanic. They think of both of those things, and then if it's being solved a completely different way, they're like, I don't like that, and I want to change it. I don't think they ever do it with the intent of like, oh, I want people to not have fun. It's like they're probably doing it so people do it in a more organic way instead of cheesing it. But I think there's always been cases where cheese lasting for a long time is kind of fun, and it now, like you said, seems like they're just instantly changing this stuff. So they've kind of taken a stance against it, like we want it to be done this way. But then also, if you're going to fix all the cheese that frequently, like where are the fixes to these bosses being absolutely ridiculous, right?
100%.
Right.
I think
And I
that's
think
the
for-
main thing.
The prime example are the juggernauts in Tal'Dazar. What is the actual solution aside from just running around, right? Like it's actually very lame that the way you deal with the juggernauts is to have everyone stand in melee except for one person being out and just running around in a circle. I feel like there's got to be a better solution to it, but unfortunately, like they haven't done anything about
We've heard your
mechanic
feedback,
itself.
and Juggernauts will now target players in melee as well.
right. Yeah, now you can.
Yeah, that'd be
That's
sick.
it.
Well, I mean, even on like Soul, the Goliath, the tree guy. So there's two issues. It's like it does too much damage to you, but then also you're stunned. The stun is probably the most egregious part, because what do you even personal in that fight? I guess the clears, but like personaling Soulthorn is like the best personal of all time, but you can't even do that.
But you
You
can't.
have to
Yeah.
like pre-personal it. So I think just a simple solution of, I mean, this has been talked about a lot. It can still do a lot of damage to you, but if you have the ability to react to that damage, then it becomes more feasible, and it'll also die at a reasonable amount of time if you are not CC'd and you can hit your own thing. So there, that doesn't seem like a crazy solution. Like they could implement that in 2 seconds, and it's just instantly a
Yeah, just make it a root instead of a stun.
yeah. I don't know. It seems like an easy solution. I mean, everyone's thought of this, right? Why are you stunned? But it also wasn't a problem before. Like this was how the boss used to be. It was just it's just way overtuned now. I kind of want to shift this a little bit. So we've done a little bit of Raid, done a little Mythic Plus. I think overall we're really happy with both of them, right? Like there are changes to be made with both, but definitely in both, yeah. But pretty happy. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think about the upgrade system. This last patch was like the crazy. They just implemented it. It was obviously, we talked about this from the beginning, obviously way too strong. And the issue with it before was you never felt that sense of progression after like 2 weeks. You were just straight up full bis. And then they added late in that patch the mythic track, and then now we have had the mythic track from the beginning of the patch. So how it feels like now is you get a very, very playable character very fast, like really, really good gear, but there still is that sense of progression every week. Every week you're getting a new craft. Next week you're getting a new catalyst charge, and then all the while you're getting just enough aspect crest to basically top off one mythic track piece of gear every week, plus like a little bit extra, and that is your character feels meaningfully more powerful every week. They've managed to achieve that while also slowing down the thing, which I haven't heard a lot of people complaining about that. I know when we talked about this at the beginning of season 2, I think Dratnos and I were both like, you guys have to understand they are going to slow this down. And people were like, no, I want my gear and I don't want to get any slower. And then we're like, I mean, it might even be, you're saying this now 2 weeks into the season, but like, you know, like 2 months from now, you might not play the game as long because you're just not having that reward progression path, which is fundamental to all RPGs, right? That ended up definitely being the case near the end of the season, combined with some other augmentation related issues. But like this patch has been, I don't know. What do you guys think? I love it personally. I think they did it exactly right this patch.
It feels like they hit the sweet spot for sure. Like we don't feel too fast, but at the same time, we're not just bogged down by having to rely on RNG drops from Raid or your vault. One weird thing though is the discounted upgrade system. It's kind of weird that you can equip a polearm, for example, as a boomkin and just be able to upgrade your
Caster
intellect
weapon.
staff or yeah. I mean, it makes sense, but like it's nice, right? It's definitely nice that it allows you to freely upgrade your, well, not freely, but pretty much freely upgrade your off spec. But it does feel a little bit weird that you can just like, you know, get one of these pieces and just upgrade your gear.
It's like a week 1 or
That
2
aside-
problem, right? But I
Yeah, pretty much,
what's the
right now.
solution? You know, the solution is you have a multi-classer that plays Feral and Moonkin. They get a Feral weapon and they go their Moonkin thing, and the game's like, oh, you got to earn one of these too. Like I think that's a reasonable, like, weird thing
Yeah.
to not mess up that other person.
If anything, it's like
Yeah.
it's weird that they chose to make it the forgiving way, right? Like that's normally they would
Yeah,
do it
you're
the way
exactly
where it's
right,
like
yeah.
screw you, and like
It
if you're
is,
Fury
yeah,
Warrior,
it is
double
weird,
screw
yeah.
you. Yeah. I think it's great as well. I think that the upgrade system is close to perfect now. The thing I actually find kind of weird is how important the 2 sources of free enchanted worms crests are in the first few weeks. I feel like that's something that they could look at because it feels like a strange amount of power that is not from the upgrade system but like ties into it, and if you're not getting it, you kind of are missing out on a bunch of free crests that ignore the cap. So
But that
I don't
only
know.
really applies to like very little people, right? Like, I don't really know of a lot of people who actually go out of their way doing that.
yeah, but that's because it was like an annoying grind. But if there's an annoying grind that people aren't doing, then they're even worse off, right?
I mean,
That,
this
like,
is exactly why they
they're just
moved
behind.
away from AP and things like that, right? It's the
Yeah.
exact same philosophy. Yeah, I kind of understand. The thing
Yeah.
that I am a little weird about, speaking of like Crest and Crest economy, is after you're done with Worms Crest, you can trade your Worms Crest 90 for 15 Aspects Crest, but it counts towards your cap. It should absolutely not count towards your cap.
I'm glad
Right?
it does. I'm glad it doesn't. I'm glad you don't get around your cap that way. Cause
Really?
like, if you could trade up all your crests to do that, it's like okay. Like for me, at least, still on progression right now, I would need to farm my cap of
Oh,
whelplings
okay.
and drakes and worms to trade them all up into aspects for like 1 extra upgrade. So I'm actually glad that it's like it's useful a little bit, but it's mostly. Well, here's what I'll say. I think that the ratio could be a little bit more favorable because it doesn't ignore the cap. Like the trade up ratio could be like 60 to 15 or
60 to
45 to
15.
15.
Yeah.
Because like I think it definitely needed to be either a bad trade up ratio or respect the cap. But given that it respects the cap, which I actually am glad it does because I don't have to think about it for like optimizing, in the first few weeks. I think they could make it more friendly for alts and stuff later on that outgrow their Drake's Crest and then still get some value out of them. So that would be the change I would make to it.
This is probably one of the rare scenarios where I'm out of touch with this because I'm playing the game so much randomly that I have an unlimited amount of like I'm instantly capping my worms and aspects by just doing like high
Yeah.
keys and mythic raid. So I just see myself having a bunch of worms crests that I'm getting anyway and I'm not having to work for, and they just mean nothing to me. And that is, seems weird. But also if you're not playing the game as much and you felt obligated to grind worms crest, then that would be a different and weird problem. Yeah.
I could see it being a problem for alts. Because if you are playing an alt, there is a whole lot of grinding to do.
So this season, I feel like it's felt really good for the first 5 weeks for mains, but compared to last season, there's even more aspect crest requirements to get your guy going.
Yeah.
Now the process of grinding those is better because weekly 20s is better, so that's good. But I do think they should really look at like, is 12 per completed key and 5 per depleted key really the number we want to keep going forward? Like, maybe that number should just increase by 1 per week or something as the season goes on. And certainly, I've always felt like the depleted key penalty being like you lose more than half of your crest was harsh for. Like depleting already feels bad, and I think that makes it feel worse and like makes pugs not stick together as much and does a bunch of bad things.
Yeah.
Right.
How has this is maybe a question for chat, and I don't think we're gonna get a great answer from this, but how has pugging been this season? Like in comparison to previous, like and maybe the question I'm looking for is like the 20 to 25 range compared to like 20 to 25 in previous patches.
Oh, 20 to 25. Oh, bad.
How
Dude.
many pug 25s are even firing?
There actually
Dude,
are
there's
quite
a decent
bit from
amount
what I've
in the
seen.
group finder.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there really are a lot.
I've been wanting to do
Like
them
I
for.
said,
I've been wanting to do them for content because there's so many in the group finder, like 25 and 26s. But like on Tyran, that just sounds so crazy. Like, dude, just imagine like a pug doing let's not even cherry pick the hardest key. Like, imagine a pug no comms doing like a 26 Throne of the Tides. It's extremely
yeah,
unlikely,
you just
right?
get destroyed by these bosses. I think a large part of it is there is an extreme amount of coordination required in these keys, and people are getting to that point really quickly. I mean, it's even noticeable in the keys that I'm doing. Like, I've been doing a bunch of keys with Yumi TV again. He came back from playing Classic World of Warcraft, and he's been having a hard time adjusting with the amount of coordination required in these keys now. Because before, it used to just be, all right, like the healer just does the healing, and then like all mechanic happens, you press your defensive. But now it's way more complicated than that. Like it's you have to have everything planned out for every single mechanic. It's like, oh, there's a cinder and ice coming from Archmage, so you gotta have this plan for that. And then there's the other mechanic which requires everyone to have their personals, and then there's another mechanic which requires health stones. And it hasn't really ever been that way. So
Yeah.
I would imagine pugs are probably
I mean,
in a
pugs
rough spot.
are definitely getting farmed by the high tyrannical bosses. There's no way they're not. I mean, they're just insane. What last season had some of the best, maybe the best comp diversity in Mythic Plus ever, going into 10.1.5, and then 10.1.5 had famously probably the worst class diversity ever in the history of Mythic Plus. What does it look like this season so far? 4 or 5 weeks in.
It's actually quite open. People still 1 month in don't even really know what is like the quote unquote meta tank or meta healer. And even DPS is actually people are not set in stone with this yet.
I can
yeah,
pop you a
everyone's going
link
on
if
about
you want to see.
Yeah, actually.
oh, yeah,
that
pull it
over.
up.
Okay, we got.
Yeah, that's cool.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
pretty.
So it is worth noting that the start of the season is always like the high keys are always diverse at the start of a season because people are just gearing their raid characters. The keys aren't very high. People aren't like pushing. And I think this is looking at the top 2,000 runs of each week, but you can still see compared to like the mid of season 2 that things are definitely like the tank debate is wide open between especially Prop Pally and Vengeance DH. I think the Blood DKs are going to recede a little bit because I think that's a lot of people's like rating characters.
Yep.
Although they can get the legendary.
Yeah, I was
right?
about to say it could recede and then increase as well, depending on that. Because the thing seems kind of weak right now, but they keep buffing it, so I don't know.
Yeah. Then the healer side of things, there's the Disc Mistweaver Druid debate that is, I think, wide
that
open.
one's heavily contested.
It's heavily
Yeah, that's-
contested, in my opinion, though. When you see 26 to 29% priest, 29 to 28% resto druid, two very commonly recently meta have always been good in Mythic Plus healers, and then you see Mistweaver only 3% behind them in representation, a famously not very good Mythic Plus healer outside of MDI in that one season, and a class that a lot of healers do not have in their toolkit. I think Mistweaver is, if I were to take a bet on any of these, it would actually be Mistweaver. I think the group buffs are not as good, but I think I think Mistweavers are like absolutely cracked for this season, and just not a lot of people play them yet.
Yeah,
I'm having a
I
hard time with
agree.
that myself. I'm leaning a little bit towards this priest myself.
But that's good though that we're having this conversation. Like there's a decent amount of value, and then there's a raid buff issue too, because like where would Disc and Resto be if they didn't have Mark of the Wild and Fort? Like those are mass. I mean, Mistweaver buffs are actually pretty good too, right? Like 8% healing taken and 4% avoidance. It's definitely not bad. But
Yeah, if you start getting to a key though where it's about like living the one shot, right? You do want Mark of the Wild and Fort.
yeah, you're definitely right. But then look at DPS, right? It seems like the meta has kind of settled into Aug and Havoc. Those seem like pretty, which we can talk about Aug in a second, because I think Aug is a pretty interesting conversation, actually. Demo has been insane. Hunter's been insane, even after nerfs. Rogue, is that Rhett?
Yeah,
Yep.
Oh, Rhett's
That's,
blasting in keys? Okay.
That is red.
That's
they're
actually
gonna be
really
holding
interesting.
that stick soon too. So
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Okay.
could be the year.
All right, so let's talk about the DPS comp a little bit. Well, let's talk about Aug at the end. What do you guys think are the best 3 classes right now, if you had to choose? Player skill aside.
That's
How about we each take one? I'll start with Havoc.
Okay.
Dorki, you go next.
I'll get put
let
in this
Max
spot.
Give everyone.
Okay.
I'll let Max give everyone. So I'm gonna say Demo.
Me too.
Nice.
I think Warlock.
Wait, Wait,
No.
no, you're supposed to say the third one.
Oh, I mean, that's just it's Og, right now.
Yeah,
but,
it's all.
Yeah.
But like, I think you were the one who had to choose the hard one. I think Demo is right. It looks like it's actually recently like tied with Hunter for representation as far as this graph is concerned. But I think there's one very, very important thing here, and that is that everything in these dungeons at a high level is trying to kill you all the time. And warlocks are built like houses, and these other classes are not. Even rogues, like James has to take elusiveness in multiple dungeons to live as a rogue, right? There's hunters and warlocks tankiness cannot be compared. Warlocks are historically really tanky, and they're just stacking verse for some reason. So I mean, they're just like,
Yeah.
I mean, just
It's because their tier set just gets 5 casts, so it doesn't scale with haste. So the classic like demo lock haste good thing has just stopped being true. It's so weird.
Yeah, which is also just a famous warlock thing because warlocks were so down bad going into this patch, and admittedly, all of the wizards in raid are pretty weak right now. But like, just knowing that anytime you see warlocks complaining about how doomed their class is, they're always just like the very best class at something. So, you know how it is. I think BM Hunter being in like pretty relevant this whole patch so far has been good too. Like that's pretty rare, right? Like hunters require so much to be good in dungeons because they kind of don't have a great toolkit for it in a lot of ways. So seeing hunters be used is really strong. I think that's nice.
I think the thing that
Hunter's
hunters like they also just beat EHP checks now because they just have like 70% more
HP.
health than everybody else, which they still don't like self-sustain particularly well, but at least now you can bring them to a dungeon and it's not like they're getting one shot and they're rotting out, right? It's they're just rotting out, and that's you can work with that, especially with the strength of the healers right now. So I think what they've done to Hunter over this expansion, I think it's taking a little while for the community to kind of realize this, because I still see people talking about Hunter as like a squishy spec, but it's not anymore. It's like it doesn't sustain itself well, but it has so much health.
Yeah, I mean, they used to be the squishiest DPS class in the game, and now there's like multiple classes that are like shamans and balanced druids are significantly squishier than hunters are. So there's that. Let's talk about augmentation for a second. So it was like all anyone talked about in 10.1.5. They were the highest damage contribution any key, and they were the best utility in like surviving wise. It's still not even close in that regard. But their damage, it's again kind of, I still feel like this hasn't been talked enough about, that like no one actually even knows how strong evokers are because logs are still not working at all as far as attributing people's damage back to them. We did an insane amount of testing going into this patch to figure out how good Aug was in a raid environment, so we aren't as familiar in a dungeon environment, but I can tell you 2 of them in raid playing optimally are by far the most valuable class in your raid. But then in a dungeon, I'm not sold on them being the best damage in a key. I don't know if a lot of people have done math on this yet, because you have to kind of do it without logs and a lot of sample size stuff. But I think it would be really cool if near the end of this season, right now with bosses being the way they are on Tyran, there's like no way. Like you kind of need Aug to realistically live. Like all these one-shots, right? Like imagine Yasma, Tree Boss and Darkheart, just all these bosses that just are potentially one-shotting you with every cast of the spell at a certain key level. Imagine doing that without Obsidian Scales on the whole group and Zephyr, right? I mean, it's just too good. It's too consistent for that. But like, I would love to see an interesting problem being solved later this season in people as they go into the higher keys, and it becomes more about having the damage to kill something in time and timing a key's timer rather than just living, which is currently not the main problem outside of Rise. I would like to see people experimenting with dropping Aug and going for a higher damage comp, which I think some people already are, right? Did you say that, Dorki?
We've seen a couple, but not really, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know
just
if
like
how much
random
of that is
keys
like
here and there.
like an optimal decision or just like what they happened
Right,
to
it's
play
just
with
like I'm
that
playing
day.
with my friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish.
But I mean, I do think we'll see a lot of these optimizations when MDI comes around. Whenever MDI comes around, if it does, it'll be one of those situations where every team's going to be trying all sorts of classes and seeing what's going to be the quickest. But so anecdotally, I do feel like having an augmentation is slower. It could just be complete BS, but it feels that way. I don't know if anyone else feels that way.
I think it is slower, but it's like
Safer.
if you're two chesting and then getting into a deplete, right? And the augmentation means the deplete's not a deplete.
Yeah,
then it's
the
better.
philosophy of keys. Anytime keys are live to the end and you time it, and it's not like you have to absolutely blast to beat this keys timer, that is AUG incarnate. That is what AUG is play safe big IO. That is what the spec is. And I get it. It is anecdotal, but and we won't know until logs are fixed. Who knows when that's going to happen? But I'm feeling pretty confident that AUG is like, if you pick the 3 best DPS, I think it's going to beat out a comp with AUG for sure. But what do you guys think that comp is, by the way, if you had to guess? Imagine AUG doesn't exist right now. What are the 3 classes in your group that are DPS?
Oh, that's so hard. Dratnos, you go first. What is your comp?
I mean, can we just play a second
Can we
purple
spec
man?
stack? Yeah, I was gonna say, can we spec stack?
Like if it's
which
on live
purple man?
servers, just play a second purple man, either purple man, but probably the dark purple man. Yeah, an extra DH, I think. I don't know. I like in MDI, obviously you can't do that though. So, but in MDI, if it's MDI again this season, it'll be low keys. So it won't
I think you're
matter.
playing Unholy in MDI, and I don't think you're
Unholy
playing AUG.
for sure is what's happening there.
Yeah.
Especially with Fear Lab.
Which is
but
crazy.
even
Look
without-
look at Unholy in the representation of this. It's like invisible
Oh,
almost.
feels bad.
There it is.
Yeah.
It's actually not that bad in M+. Like, it's pretty terrible in Raid, but it's really not bad in M+.
Oh, they got a really good buff
was
last week
huge
too.
AoE.
They got like a 5% Mythic Plus buff or something. They're definitely strong. Yeah.
Yeah, it gigabangs in AoE. It just kind of lacks in single target.
Man. All right. Cool. So where do we go from here? I guess we talked about comps. We talked about
Do we want to do the? I think we have a Patreon question of the day.
Yeah, we can do
We
that.
could do.
Let me reset my stream here.
All right, our
do
question
it.
comes from Reshik that says, as an elemental shaman main, I definitely get frustrated at the lack of utility we bring to raid. Max, you mentioned on a Twitch clip that you weren't close to bringing Ellie on any Race to World first boss.
Oh, yeah.
No raid buff is particularly brutal. Do you think it's more likely that Ellie gets a raid buff eventually in a rework? Or will Blizzard reconsider having so many raid buffs? What would make sense for Ellie raid buff?
All right. Well, I want to clarify the Ellie thing. So that is not true for a lot of the previous raids. In fact, we have a very, very good Ellie player. So we want, like, Childrill is one of our best 20 players. It's just very rare that you find Ellie to be able to be played. So we want to bring Ellie. It's not like we're against it. This raid, they just competed. In a lot of raids, they compete for their raid spot with Hunter. And a lot of people see that as like, oh, they're male. That doesn't really matter. It's more that, like, the other ranged you're bringing, you're not really competing with melee. The other ranged you're competing with do different things. Mages do very different things than what hunters and shamans do. What is it? Warlocks do totally different things than what hunters and shamans do. Shadow priests, moonkins, like, they have these niches that are very specific and very good. Shamans and hunters do very similar damage profiles. There's a lot of Ellie Shaman single target builds that are like BM. And there's a lot of, like, bursty AoE Shaman builds that are kind of like MM. So they have like so many parallels that you end up just choosing one or the other. And hunters were just insanely strong this raid. Like, how could you argue playing an Ellie Shaman when you could play a hunter, which is arguably easier, more tanky significantly? It's an excellent turtle raid. There's not actually a lot of really good turtle raids. This is a very good turtle raid. To where it's like, why would you ever play? I mean, Childrill, a Ellie Shaman, which is not a bad class in this raid, played a hunter. And yeah, he was like one of our hunters we could have brought. The raid buff problem is a big one. I think that's probably a entire podcast episode at some point. Throughout the history of WoW, they have done these. They've repeated themselves almost 3 times now, where they go big into raid buffs. It becomes a problem. They remove all of them. They slowly build back to that point. Everyone has a raid buff. They remove them. They do all of them. Maybe we're at that part of that cycle now, because it does seem weird that they felt pressured this whole expansion to give hunters a raid buff. They finally kind of do it, but they do it, right? And Ellie Shamans are just sitting there as the only DPS class without one. It's insane. Even in a patch that has mana.
Yeah, and DK.
Yeah. That's true. We can get into the DK thing in a second. That is technically true with DK, but DK has something else that no one else has. Like, for example, if Ellie Shamans had Death Grip, you would see Ellie Shamans in comps all the time, right? So, like, those two things are not the same, but I would agree that Death Knights also should get something if everyone else is. But, yeah, I don't know. If you are... like giving hunters a raid buff. How is there one class that just doesn't have one? It certainly matters, especially in keys. Why do you see Moonkins in keys sometimes? Pretty much Mark of the Wild. Same thing with Restro Druid. Why do you see Priest in keys? Like probably because of Fort. Like raid buffs are now mattering more and more, even in Mythic Plus, like the other part of PvE. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, the defensive ones, especially for M+.
Yeah, it's I mean, obviously, if you want my opinion, I would love all raid buffs to be gone because part of my job is coming up with a cool comp that's better than someone else's cool comp, and that's like a competitive thing. But I can't really do that. Like everyone knew the comp this raid. There was no guessing, right? I said this on stream the other day, but like even like the healers right now, like the healer community in this game, there's no one more wrong than them trying to pick the best healers for an upcoming patch. Like competitive WoW subreddit has a higher chance of being right than the healer community knowing what healers are going to be good in the next patch. So they got that perfectly right. The tanks were perfectly right. All the top guilds ran the exact same comp. There was very little guess game involved in what was going to be good, and a lot of that was because of raid buffs. That being said, if they had them, maybe, I don't know, maybe there's just something else. Maybe if there's no raid buffs, you're just stacking classes that have insane utility, right? You're just bringing more roars, you're bringing more zephyrs and stuff like that, and it just becomes something else. Or you're just stacking 6 or 7 of one class, and is that really interesting? Everyone can't do it. I don't know. It forces diversity. I think it's a bigger conversation to be had, but yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm also not a fan of the current status quo. I think that some kind of middle ground where like they could do stuff like raid buffs that are shared by 2 classes, and so there's like, 7 raid buffs or whatever, and each of them is held by 2 classes, and that way it's like you will always have all of them if you have some diversity, and you don't get to stack 20 arcane mages or whatever, but you also don't, you're not feeling like, oh, we don't have our Havoc Demon Hunter is missing raid today, we should not play the game. Like that, currently that's the case, right? If you're a 1 Havoc Demon Hunter guild and your Havoc Demon Hunter, can't get off work one night, you may as well not do mythic progression that day. You're not gonna kill any bosses under those circumstances, which I feel like is a really nasty place, because it also creates this problem of like, oh, the second Havoc Demon Hunter is applying to join my guild. Unless it's a tier like this where Havoc Demon Hunter is one of those like 3 flex spots at the end, you just don't, whether you invite a second Havoc Demon Hunter to your guild into your raid isn't about how good they are, it's about do you already have one or not, right? And if you don't have one, you're taking that guy no matter how good he is, and even if you do have one, if that guy's pretty good but not like the best player you've ever seen, you're not taking him, which I think is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine they're probably going to double down on raid buffs.
Maybe.
So, if anything, we'd probably see Ellie Shamans getting a raid buff
yeah.
sometime soon.
I guess if you're an Ellie Shaman, like, I think that is I think it would be better if Ellie Shaman, like, if everybody has one, at least it's better than most people having them.
Of course, yeah.
You gotta go all in on this.
Yeah, like even right now it's probably better than it was a few patches ago, where it was like, because a few patches ago it was like 70% of classes had one, and now it's like 90%.
For last expansion it was like 50% or something.
Yeah.
And then that was at the point where the people who didn't have a raid buff weren't all individually too mad, because it was like, oh, I mean, it's just like half of us do, half of us don't kind of thing. But then as it started getting closer to 100%, it started, the few people who were remaining we're just like, what's going on here? Like, what is hey, what about us, right? And like, okay, you guys are saying, oh, they'll probably just give Ellie Shaman a raid buff and they'll double down. That's what I think too. But why on earth do you not do that for this patch? This is the last season of Dragonflight, which again, the last like major season, which we can talk about also. That's a whole nother thing. Why on earth is there not a raid for an entire year? But if you're going to be like, okay, hunters, we get it. You guys have been crying the whole expansion. You don't have a raid buff, everyone else does. Here you go. And there's just the one extra class. Why not just give Ellie Shaman something, or Resto Shaman something for this patch? Like, how do you miss that? It's crazy.
It also really sucks that some of these specs are sharing the same buff. Like when you look at Druid, for example, they absolutely cannibalize the hell out of each other. I don't know. Is it crazy to think that like Feral Druid should just have like a different buff from Boomkin, for example?
Yeah, although as we start approaching like more than 20 buffs, it starts getting really cringe.
Yeah. And Red Paladin too. Man, how is it that Red Paladin can get their Red Aura taken from a Prot Paladin or?
It is
or
definitely really weird that like the question of whether or not we should bring a Boomkin this tier was not actually like part of it was that Boomkin isn't that sick, but also the fact that Feral is good is bad news if you're a Boomkin, right? Like
It
if
is
you
bad news, yeah. That's your
whatever
enemy.
whatever spec you're playing, you want the other specs of your class to be bad so that you can play that spec, right? Which is
Yeah.
another unfortunate side effect of the buffs being like this, yeah.
Well,
Also, in M plus, these buffs are wildly imbalanced. Some buffs are pretty terrible, and some buffs are OP as hell, and they absolutely make a decision in your group comp.
well, it's just yeah, but that's just because, in my opinion, that's just because of a fundamental Mythic Plus problem, though. Because the ones you're talking about are the ones that make you not get one shot, and there's way too many things that just one shot you.
I mean, just like even something as simple as like Chaos Brand versus Mystic Touch.
Oh yeah, way better. I
Yeah.
mean, even all the melee classes do most of their damage as magic nowadays. So I mean, yeah, it's way better. All right, shout out Patreon question guy.
Yeah, good question. Oh, I guess we didn't really answer like what the Ellie Shaman buff could be.
Oh,
Um,
I have a take.
Bell
It's
crit.
Yeah,
they already
go
have
ahead.
it. They already have it too. I don't like Sky Fury Totem because then it's just like, okay, now previously 0 shamans had raid buffs and now there's 2. I still don't understand why paladins have 2. And then I think they have it in their tree. It's like Mana Spring Totem or something, and it just works. It should just work passively, and when they press buttons, they just give mana to healers. Mana is now we could have talked about this in Mythic Plus earlier. Mana is relevant in Mythic Plus now for the first time in a while. Mana is very
Bro,
relevant.
ain't
in
no way
raid.
you're playing an Ellie Shaman for that.
Not in dungeons, right? I'm not saying it like competes with other things, but like especially in raid, if you brought a shaman and it gave a significant amount of mana, that would be valuable. Like you would think about using that. Like that could mean your raid is just more alive. Your healers can spend more frequently. And I don't know if that's like a super, I guess, like sexy raid buff. Like it's not like awesome, but like it would give them something, and they already have it in their kit. But yeah, I don't know, something that's powerful enough to get them in. They kind of already have it in their tree.
Dude, I'm sorry, but I just can't help but feel like imagine your buff is just giving mana to the healers. And that must feel terrible.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think they would take it at this point. You could make Windrush let you cast while moving as well. That's something I've been thinking about too, because like it's already worse than Roar. Like it's much more annoying positionally
Ooh.
to set up.
This is a good idea.
But it's I think that would give it like some real oomph to it
Wind-
that makes it just not like budget Roar.
Okay, so Windrush for shamans, for Ellie shamans, not all shamans, because then you would just have your enhance also do this.
Yeah.
Would just give cast while moving to ranged, similar to what was that hunter thing?
Aspect of the Fox.
Aspect of the Fox from back then.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, they should have never removed Aspect of the Fox. They overreacted to boss design and nerfed that ability. There was a boss that like required an historically large amount of movement in P1. Like I don't think there's even been a boss still that has had as much movement as P1 Blackhand. And you brought hunters for that exact reason, and they were like, "Oh, this ability can't be in the game," and they got rid of it. It was perfectly fine in High Mall. It was just nice. It was a good buff. They should do that. I think that's really smart. They should bring back Aspect of the Fox, but just in Ellie Shaman, some kind of Ellie Shaman.
Maybe
form.
Resto as well, or maybe Resto gets the mana buff for all the other healers because there it kind of like feels
You could tie it to Spirit Walker's Grace, right?
appropriate for healers to buff healer mana.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
Blizzard has mentioned multiple times that they as designers don't want it to just be a end all be all. Everyone has a 60-minute raid buff thing. Like they think that's boring. It is boring. It's like, oh well, every class just has to have one of these things, and whatever. Like it can be done in more interesting ways than that. And if they want to do that, that would be an interesting way to do it. And the alternative would be just giving them, I don't know, just give shamans a 60-minute raid buff. But then why would you not just also have your already required enhance bring that, right?
Yeah, it would literally have to be like not enhanced, right? It would have to be the other two specs.
Hopefully,
Which would be fine. I don't know. Enhanced has Wind Fury. Like it'll be fine.
hopefully we're in the same hopefully we're in the part of WoW history where they're turning the page on raid buffs again. I think all of us doubt that, but it's happened before twice, so maybe it'll happen again.
I mean, so okay, I got some tinfoil here. They're adding these hero talents, right? Which are basically like subclasses. This could be the perfect time to just introduce like 10 raid buffs and just distribute them so that each one is held by like 3 different hero talents across a bunch of different classes.
Ooh, this is a good cook, because that's part of the
Yeah.
issue with it right now, right? Is that people feel like they need this specific thing, but if you just had more options to bring. Or, I mean, someone mentioned this at the beginning of this expansion, just giving hunters that thing they used to have, where hunters are like the
the budget version of whatever raid buff you're missing.
Exactly, yeah, and like that kind of gives them value. But I think a better version of that is not a budget version. There are multiple classes that bring the real thing. Or I don't know, just like making scrolls again. Like scrolls just worked, you know? So I don't know.
That was nice. That was expensive though.
Yeah. Scribes. Dude, imagine somebody in your raid group pops a 2 quality scroll instead of a 3 quality scroll as well.
I mean, hell, they could even make like an enchant. Like maybe like someone can enchant their weapon so that like. Even
Do you guys see this? There was actually a thing data mined on this that I just remembered for 725 that was like a trinket. That's just like Chaos Brand in a trinket slot. I don't know if like. Would you guys be okay with this as the solution if you just had somebody in the raid had to give up a trinket slot and then they just got Chaos Brand?
So
well, maybe not a trinket slot, maybe like a weapon enchant or something. That'd be nice.
Yeah,
well,
I'm saying like the trinket slot's literally been data mined, I think. I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but that's something that I saw.
My initial thought after hearing this and thinking about it for 10 seconds is that sounds fucking awful. Like that sounds like that person is so
someone
mad.
Has the bitch job.
Yeah, like I think that person would rather not have Chaos Banner in the raid than.
Well, but I mean, we have augmentation evokers. I'm sure they would.
That's true. That does sound like augmentation work.
Responsibility.
Yeah.
Oh, apparently that's for the Delve NPCs. But hey, you could do that in Mythic Plus though. Like I don't know. I just feel like Mythic Plus should.
Oh, that would be cool.
Mythic Plus specifically. So when you, I think it was it like the. Not challenge modes. There was a thing in MOP, and was it the Proving Grounds that gave you all the raid buffs? Like, I don't know. When you zone into Mythic Plus, would it be bad if you just were some random NPC just gave you all the raid buffs? Like Mark of the
That
Wild.
would actually be really cool.
Is that bad for any reason? Is that like our classes designed around having that value given to them? I'm just trying to think why it would be bad because they've actually had this in the game before.
I don't see why it would be bad at all.
Yeah, I mean, it would remove the like, oh, it's nice we have a priest because they have fort, right? But
would it be bad for forced class diversity? I think part of raid buffs in general is to force diversity in the game, and I think
I don't think so. I mean, we look at it right now, right? We have 2 demon hunters in the meta comp. Like, I don't think it really matters. Even if they removed Chaos Brand from the demon hunters, you're still gonna end up with 2 demon hunters. But also, like a lot of people who say like, oh, you end up stacking to be able to say best DPS or whatever. It very rarely ever happens. And the only time it ever happens if it's like some super optimized situation like MDI back in BFA. And even then, that's banned. So people generally don't spec stack from what I've noticed.
There's very few specs that actually work well being stacked. Like, the only classes that have ever been stacked are ones that kind of like either have some kind of niche that is untouchable by any other class. So like an example would be like, whenever Moonkin Starfall spread out damage is good, you would bring a bunch of those because no other class can even kind of do that thing. Whenever you're stacking a bunch of ads on a boss and Unholy's getting max Festermite stacks, no one can do that. And the other that was triple stacked were Windwalkers at the end of Legion. It was Rogues in BFA and it was Hunters in BFA. And both of those, all 3 of those classes have a unique trait of doing damage all the time. There's a lot of classes where even if they were powerful, they're bursty enough to where delaying and offsetting 2 minutes is like really weird and unintuitive and usually not good. And having classes that work together usually involve bringing different classes that have like a little bit different profiles. So it would still not happen too often, but it would certainly be kind of annoying.
That was actually a very real thing when we were doing time trials. When we were doing time trials, we tried fitting in a Devastation Evoker. And it was just not it because we were super 2-minute reliant. Like, we could literally only play the game every 2 minutes. If we didn't have 2-minute CDs, we were doing absolutely nothing. Whereas if you just had like a Fire Mage instead, Fire Mage was able to just always do damage. And your damage in your group was just like well spread out enough to the point where you can actually play pack by pack and actually pull off these big pulls. So it absolutely matters a lot how classes do damage and the utility they bring.
I want to talk about one more thing before the end of today. Today was a great episode. I'm happy to be talking to you guys again. I wonder how... I want to talk about nerfs and how they've been nerfing classes and the correct way for them to approach this. So they nerfed... I'm sure there's more nerfs to come maybe in this season, but they nerfed DH pretty good bit. They nerfed Hunter a pretty good bit. But they importantly did not ruin the playstyle of either of those classes. And I think that is something they should keep trying to do. Even if they continue nerfing it, don't change the way they're playing. When they're doing these reworks, the way these classes play is like mint. It is so good compared to what it used to be. The good example of this being done poorly is what they did with Holy Paladin. They reworked Holy Paladin in 10.1.5. It was very, very strong, very good, and very fun to play. And they nerfed that class in the absolute worst way possible. That class is horrible to play now in this raid. You can't even press Crusader Strike. Like, you're just running around casting in range. It is horrific what they did to that class. They nerfed it in the worst way possible, which is making it less fun to play. And I think that when you're nerfing something, that should be the number one thing you focus on. I don't know if you guys have any examples from ones you've noticed as well.
I mean, I agree, though. I think the Holy Paladin example is good, right? Where they kind of looked at it and they were like, oh, these new talents we made are too good, right? Let's nerf them. But then now you're just, I don't know, it's just much worse, right? Like, you no longer have the play style. So I think like blanket up and down, and then like, or targeting the AoE up and down, you know, as needed, right? Like, I think those are good levers to go for. But yeah, like specific talent gutting is something that they should be really careful with. Like, they need to be really sure that they are not doing what they did to Holy Paladin before they destroy specific talents.
So, fun aside, I mean, I feel like power is related to, well, I guess not really fun.
Certainly.
Power is absolutely a factor in the fun as well. I know a lot of people say Havoc's really fun at the moment, but if the class didn't do damage, would it still be as fun? And I think a lot of people would probably say no.
It's always less, but there's two different ways you can do this. You can nerf Havoc and nerf its damage, and you're still having the same awesome playstyle with the inertia. I mean, it is just simply awesome and way better than what they've been playing this whole expansion so far. And you will feel bad about it, but you'll still have fun playing it. But absolutely, for some people, doing big damage is part of the fun, a large part of the fun. That is, I would include myself in that. And then there's the scenario where they're nerfed, and then they also play like shit. And that is significantly worse than just doing less damage. And that kind of ties me into the very last thing. I want to leave all of you all with a question. Blizzard now has 10.2.7 or 2.5 or 10.3 maybe for Faded. I don't know exactly what the patches will be called. They're going to rework a few classes. What are the classes or specs in the game right now, performance aside, that need Jesus the most? They need this They need this play style increase.
Blood DK?
Blood DK.
Okay, elaborate.
I think absolutely Blood DK. I hate how maintenance heavy it is. I really this is one of the only tanks. It is the only tank that didn't receive any reworks at all of the entire expansion. I really don't like how maintenance heavy it is. They need to scrap the whole D&D and single target. Maybe even just like scrap a lot of the D&D talents that buff D&D. I don't like how you have to be keeping up Coagulopathy and Icy Talons. That's also very annoying. You can't, like, right now Death Striking feels like you're just pressing it to maintain your buffs rather than actually using it to heal yourself. And I don't like that Bone Storm is a useless talent.
Oh, I love your
cook. It makes no sense that... Yeah, it's so dumb that the only spender you have as a DK is a single target Death Strike. That aside, I also don't really like the fact that you have to choose between Bloodshot and Umbilicus. Oh, and Mass Grip too, of course. Like, Mass Grip should be something that you can easily acquire.
The way they changed Vengeance, you would get all that stuff you just mentioned for free probably if you did that same thing to Blood DK. So I actually really agree with you. Also, I forget what podcast episode it was, but you had an insane cook about Blood DK. And it was like something like the runic power you spend instead of Death Strike gives you like a few seconds of Bone Storm, which is like some way of passive HPS rather than like a direct heal, and it also gives you the option to like AoE with your runic power. God, that was it was something like that, right? It sounded so good.
Yeah, Dratnos talked about this too.
Yeah, I remember we talked. I think this was maybe the last episode before we left. So,
I believe it was a Patreon question.
Maybe, it was one of the Patreon questions. Oh yeah, well, if you didn't hear that.
It was. Really was it in our Patreon episode?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh well, that's an excellent time to talk about how you guys should maybe check out our Patreon. Ooh.
Yeah, we had we answered like what 30, 40 minutes of questions recently. That's up in a Patreon video, so definitely worth checking out. I think my answer for this is warrior. I feel like the
Yeah, yeah.
bottom of the warrior class tree is just in dire need of attention because it just like shockwave being there has just always felt so wrong.
That is bad.
Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah.
It's unassailably bad. Yep.
Yeah. So I think I would start there, and then maybe I think the prot spec tree is good. I don't know about arms though. I feel like arms also could use a rethink of like what is making the spec fun to play and like what are some actually fun options we could put here. But I haven't played enough of arms or fury to really feel too strongly about that.
I just feel like their identity is stale. Like they've had the Fury Warrior is good 5-target cleave. They're decently tanky and they're like pretty easy and just do damage all the time class. They've been that for years, and arms has been the like 2-target and like 35% execute class for like a really long time. And they've had a few times where they've had like really, really fun execute windows and stuff like that, especially with Lucid Dreams. And I think they don't, there's nothing about them that makes them special right now enough that compares to how cool the recent reworked melee have been. So I actually completely agree with you. I think they could just use some spice, and it's like a really iconic class. A lot of people play it, so it'd probably be one on their list. I don't know if I have one.
Also,
I would just say Windwalker just because I play Windwalker and love Windwalker. I just think Windwalker has so many fundamental problems with it, but that's been talked about a million times.
I think one thing they need to standardize across the board for DPS specs in general is like they need to do something about having to choose between AoE and single target.
Great point.
Yeah.
It's been a criminal problem for sub specs. Some of them being Feral Druid and Red Paladins and God, I don't know
Well, it's
what
a
else.
criminal problem, but it's also an enabler of your class being OP. What are the two classes besides Augmentation we talked about today that are insane in Mythic Plus? They happen to be Havoc and Demo Lock, both of which, I'm not kidding, swap like 1 or 2 talents in their spec tree to gain all of their damage. And who would have guessed they're awesome on single target and AoE in dungeons, right? Like, and other classes just simply, in the worst case scenario, a Ret Paladin, when they are pressing their finisher, literally chooses to AoE or single target. And both of those classes can do both of them at the same time. And it's just incomparably better.
I do think that the Rep Pally way, like if you can, with the same talent build, have a strong Templar's Verdict and a strong Divine Storm, I think that could be okay. Like choosing in gameplay moments whether to do single target or AoE, I think is fine. I think it's just when the talent build is like, okay, your Divine Storm is not talented, is not empowered, right? Or like your Templar's Verdict sucks, right? Like that's the problem, I think.
But is
Yeah, and also
I don't know how you,
Because like
go
Demo
ahead.
Lock, right? Like you're pressing Implosion or not, right? Like that's that's sort of similar to pressing Divine Storm or not.
It was pretty low
that's
lift.
true, but I feel like if you're pressing Divine Storm, for example, it's gotta hit hard, you know? It
Yeah.
can't just be another AoE. It's gotta be something more valuable than just
Yeah.
another, Blade Dance, for example.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that, every class should just do their single target rotation and it just does AoE. It's just that classes like that are very likely to be strong. And
Yeah.
and it does bring a question with talent trees is which one would you like more? Would you rather be a class that plays the same build all the time and swaps one talent for AoE? It probably leads to you being powerful. Or would you rather be a class that actually has a bunch of interesting decisions that you make at 2 and 3 and 5 and uncapped AoE, like where you actually can feel meaningfully different in a good way on those things without losing too much base power? It's more like finishing touches rather than the identity of your whole spec. And like what is the goal for talent trees? Again, this is probably another entire podcast episode, but like I think there's so much there, and the game is pretty split on them right now. And I think if they're split, they need to commit to one and do it, because if it's split, it's going to be like that the balance of that is impossible.
Yeah, it just feels like class design across the board is not equal.
Yep.
All right, writing that topic down for we've got a long content drought ahead of us here, so
Oh, we're gonna get saucy. Yeah, we're gonna get.
yeah, we got a lot of we're gonna get to a point where we're gonna be really scraping the bottom of the barrel for content, so this is good.
I also want to do. I talked to some developers. I'm sure all you guys did as well at BlizzCon, and something that they can do is like they have to get cleared for it, but they can do things like this. And I think one thing I would love to do is interview like an encounter designer for Mythic Plus or for Raid, or I'm sure Skarzar would do this in a second, like kind of gearing and loot stuff. And they are awesome conversations. Like they're the kind of people you talk to and you just talk to them for like 2 hours and you don't even like, they're so smart. So like that would just be an unbelievably banger episode. And I would love, because they have to go through media training, and I know a few of them that have. It's just more about getting improved, and I think they would be willing to do something like that. That'd be really fun.
That would be a good PoddyC episode.
Yep. All right. Lead us out, Dratnos.
All right. Well, it's 4:30 p.m., which doesn't mean it's the end of our podcast. That it's not time limited, but it is when we've decided to end today. So that's it. That's the end of the PoddyC again. It's over for now. We'll be back whenever we
next month
decide to do the next episode. So
good
luck.
Oh man.
You gotta set your notifications to on our Twitter tweets and then be there 10 minutes later when our next episode airs. That's how we'll announce these things.
Did we do it 10 minutes today? Did we give it 10-minute notice?
I think so. Yeah, I think
that goes hard actually.
Yeah, I think that's we'll try and give you a little bit more notice next time, maybe even 20 minutes. So later, everybody.
All right, see you guys.
Yep, thank you all for tuning
Dorki, are
in.
we gaming?
I have rated in an hour.
That is not ideal.
That
Tragedy.
is not ideal at all.
Dratnos, are you gaming?
I'm playing Path of Exile, man, and then I'm raiding.
Oh, did the new league come out?
No way.
Yeah.
Yeah, wait, Ben, how didn't I literally bring this up yesterday? How Ben
has been streaming. Yeah, but I don't know if that means
he slammed 42 hours.
Yeah, I don't know if that's if that's just him doing a normal season, or he kind of just does that sometimes. Yeah, I'm actually glad now that he's a streamer, because like we noticed this in Guild for so long that he will just stay up for like 3 days and it's fine. Like he's completely normal during it. It's very weird.
At the end of it, he did like those like reaction tests, and he was still at like 180 milliseconds, which is well above the population average after being awake for 42 hours.
Oh yeah, he's a freak. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I was like, oh, that must be kind of slow, and then I went and tested it myself, and I was like 210 or something. I'm like, oh my god.
What the hell? 210?
That's
bro, you're old. Yours is probably even more.
Yeah.
Dude, I had to change the way I like played battle royale games when playing with him, because if you play like a normal game, you will not kill it. Like he will just run at a team and kill them before you get there. So I had to while playing with him, you just have to full sprint and do extremely aggressive things to get any kills. So you just have to you end up playing with some other people and you just feed, because you're just like sprinting into groups of people and dying. I had to change my every time you have to swap into a different mode. All right. Amen.
All right.
See you later, boys.
Amen.
Good luck in raid.
GG.